President of the Republic of Rwanda, who will be with us very shortly. His Excellency, Mr. Emerson Mnangagwa, President of the Republic of Zimbabwe. His Excellency, Mr. Mohamed Yunus Menfi, President of the Presidential Council of the State of Libya. His Excellency, Mr. Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, President of the Republic of Somalia. His Excellency, Mr. Prosper Bazombanza, Vice President of the Republic of Burundi, representing His Excellency, Mr. Evariste Ndayishimiye, President of the Republic of Burundi. Her Excellency, Ms. Sarah Kungongelwa Amadila, Prime Minister of the Republic of Namibia. His Excellency, Mr. Ali Lamin Zain, Prime Minister of the Republic of Niger. His Excellency, Mr. Alexandre Barrow Chambrier, Vice Prime Minister of the Republic of Gabon. Honorable Suarez Sambu, Minister of Economy, Planning and Integration of the Republic of Guinea-Bissau, representing His Excellency, Mr. Omaro Sissoko Embalo, President of the Republic of Guinea-Bissau. Mr. Mateus Magala, Minister for Transport and Communication of the Republic of Mozambique, representing His Excellency, Mr. Felipe Jacinto Nyusi, President of the Republic of Mozambique. His Excellency, Mr. Musa Faki Mahamat, Chairperson of the African Union Commission. His Excellency, Mr. Joaquim Alberto Chissano, former President of the Republic of Mozambique. His Excellency, Mr. Jakaya Kikwete, former President of the United Republic of Tanzania. Honorable Professor Njunguna Ndungu, Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury and Economic Planning, and AFDB Governor and Chairperson of the Boards of Governors of the African Development Bank Group. Dr. Akinwumi A. Adesina, President of the African Development Bank Group. Honorable Governors of the African Development Bank Group, alternate Governors of the African Development Bank Group, senior officials of the Republic of Kenya, heads of regional communities and financial institutions, members of the diplomatic corps, executive directors of the African Development Bank Group, senior managements and staff of the African Development Bank Group, media houses, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vincent Mehele, Secretary General of the African Development Bank Group. I will be facilitating this opening ceremony. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the 2024 annual meetings of the Boards of Governors of the African Development Bank Group. Also, the annual meeting of the African Development Bank, African Development Fund in this beautiful city of Nairobi, also fondly known as the Green City in the Sun. The annual meetings this year are significant in that they flag off the commemoration of the 60th anniversary of the African Development Bank. On this auspicious occasion of the annual meetings, as our shareholders meet once again to take stock of the bank group's activities and performance and to make decisions, I would like to express our profound gratitude to you all for kindly and favorably responding to our invitation. There is a lot in store for everyone during this week. As you will notice from the lineup of knowledge events, numerous side events, social and hospitality events. Before we delve into the heart of the event, allow me, ladies and gentlemen, to convey our deepest, and I mean deepest and sincere appreciation to the Honorable Professor Njuguna Ndungu, Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and Economic Planning, Afdb Governor and Chairperson of the Boards of Governors, for his sterling work and dedication during his tenure at the helm of affairs of the bank's highest decision-making body, and for ensuring that Kenya, as host, held nothing back in ensuring that we had very successful annual meetings. Please join me to thank him. Honorable Governor, we thank you and appreciate your relentless efforts and great support. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the theme of this year's annual meeting is Africa's Transformation, the African Development Bank Group, and the reform of the global financial architecture. It is therefore our hope that the deliberations today will provide answers to the difficult questions embedded in the theme. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, without much further ado, I'd like to present the program of the opening ceremony. We will have a welcome statement by the Chairperson of the Boards of Governors of the African Development Bank Group, Honorable Professor Njuguna Ndungu. After that, we will have an opening video for the annual meetings. And that will be followed by the keynote speech of the President of the African Development Bank, President Akinwumi A. Adesina. After that, we will have a statement by His Excellency Mr. Musa Faki Mahamat, Chairperson of the African Union Commission. And then we will play the video by the host country and then crown it all up by the opening address of His Excellency Dr. William Samoei Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my privilege and honor to call upon the Honorable Professor Njuguna Ndungu, Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and Economic Planning, Afdb Governor for Kenya, and the Chairperson of the Boards of Governors of the African Development Bank Group to deliver his welcome statement. Mr. Chairman.
Your Excellencies, fellow governors, Commissioner of the African Union Commission, honorable ministers and governors of the African Development Bank Group, heads of international, bilateral and regional financial institutions, distinguished guests, good morning. On behalf of the Kenya government and Chair of the African Development Bank Boards of Governors, allow me to take this opportunity to welcome you all to Nairobi for the 59th annual meetings of the African Development Bank Group. These meetings are being held closely after the recent meetings of the World Bank's IDA 21 Replenishment Summit that the government of Kenya was privileged to host, and His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, is a champion. I'm therefore delighted to welcome you back here at home in Nairobi. First, I want to begin by expressing our deepest appreciation for for the warm and cordial relationship that exists between the African continent and our premier development bank, the African Development Bank. The African Development Bank mandate remains relevant and important to the African continent, as it supports a wide range of development activities that have supported in many ways the process towards economic vibrancy, economic growth, job creation, improved incomes, and better living conditions for the Africans and the African economies. We wish to reassure the bank of our continued commitment to this fruitful partnership and collaboration. Allow me also to convey my appreciation to the bank group for delivering a very relevant theme for this year's annual meetings, which is Africa's transformation, African Development Bank Group, and reform of the global financial architecture. This resonates quite well with the current global agenda and discourse on the need to reform the global financial architecture to be responsive to the dynamic needs of our continent. I'm glad that the annual meetings includes high-level plenary session for the launch of the bank's flagship publication, the 2024 African Economic Outlook, a presidential dialogue and thematic knowledge events on the theme. And this provides us with a unique opportunity to address Africa's challenges and opportunities at the highest decision-making levels. Consistent with the theme of the annual meetings, the focus of the knowledge event aims to fast-track structural transformation in Africa. This is a panacea to faster socioeconomic transformation, in addition to addressing the importance of reconfiguring global financial architecture as an engine for structural transformation. It is comforting to note that the bank's group's contribution towards Africa's socioeconomic transformation in 60 years of existence, especially on infrastructure, has been such monumental, with a significant and important mark in spite of the limited level of resources when compared to other global multilateral development institutions. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as we reaffirm our strong support to the African Development Bank, I urge colleague governors to deepen their discussions around the increase of the general callable capital. This will protect the bank's AAA rating on a sustainable basis against recurrent external shocks, including downgrade of its AAA-rated shareholders. This will enable the bank to maintain its rating trajectory and preserve its position as a strategic lender and the premier development finance institutions in Africa. But above all, reform that is consistent with the theme of the 2024 annual meetings. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in the midst of the global and even regional challenges, we have opportunities to reboot our policy framework and efforts to develop a more competitive and integrated economies in Africa that will attract greater investment. I therefore urge all of us to seize the opportunities provided during the annual meetings to bring forward practical policy discussions for collective efforts in terms of mutual dialogue, stronger partnership, effective joint coordination for the realization of the African Economic Development Agenda. With these remarks, I wish all of you fruitful discussions and present stay in Nairobi, Kenya, which has many rich offerings outside your formal sessions that I would like to invite you to sample. Asante sana. Thank you very much.
With those welcoming words of our chairperson, I'd like to introduce the 2020 annual meeting opening video. Please cue the video.
With all the minerals we have, oil, gas, metals, forest resources, carbon resources, and everything that we have, it's indefensible that Africa is poor. And I think that the wealth of Africa has been undervalued in many, many ways.
Africa has the potential to drive global emissions down and grow sustainably as the world transitions towards renewable energy. Africa hosts the world's largest green energy sources, including solar, wind, hydropower, and geothermal. But Africa loses $7 to $15 billion a year from adverse climate conditions. The continent only accounts for 3% of global emissions, but receives about 3% of global climate financing. Africa receives only 0.5% of global development aid to fight against poverty, and African countries pay up to 5 times more in financing than most developed countries. Simply put, the cost of debt is drying up Africa's economic growth. Is it fair? To achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, the African Union's Agenda 2063 and the African Development Bank's High 5 priorities, the global financial architecture needs to be reformed. If we choose transformative, new and right actions, if the global community starts accounting for the natural untapped capital owned by a country as a share of its GDP, African countries in particular would be able to access more affordable financing and better credit ratings. If the world simplifies global climate finance systems, it would increase access to global climate aid for the African countries that need it the most. If domestic resources are not used to pay the cost of debt, Africa could accelerate industrialization and develop green energies as industries. To do so, multilateral development banks have a critical role to play.
The African Development Bank initiative to rechannel SDRs to multilateral development banks could multiply their impact by 5.
We are now working with my brother of the African Development Bank to make it possible for regional development banks to use SDRs as hybrid capital.
Maybe we might consider even changing the name of that SDR to supporting development revitalization. It's a different way of SDR, but it works also for us.
The forthcoming 17th replenishment of the ADF should be doubled to 25 billion per replenishment cycle, thereby facilitating greater levels of concessional financing to its 37 low-income member countries.
And when we say we want to deconstruct the risk that makes the lending to the Global South prohibitively expensive as compared to lending in the Global North, then I think we know what we mean.
We are not talking about charity. Ultimately, the reforms to the international financial institutions will benefit all of us.
We need to turn ifs into realities for the multilateral development banks to finance even more transformative, innovative, and sustainable projects. It is to the African Development Bank Group's credit that it has tangibly supported more than 5,400 projects in 60 years and in the process improved the lives of millions of people.
Je suis très heureux parce que je sais que mes amis, mes descendants, mes enfants, tout le monde va passer sur ce pont. Et ça rallie tout Abidjan. La Y4 est ouverte, le tunnel d'Abobo est ouvert, le canal est ouvert.
On va aussi au tsunami. On s'en a pas non soleil. Et on s'en warning.
I'm very happy because this time I'm receiving a lot of customers from both two countries, Malawi and Zambia. It's because of the new one border stop which has come and making people easy to move.
Kwa hivyo nilipojiunga huku CRDB, malkia account nikachukua mkopo, kwa hiyo nikaongezea kwenye mtaji. Nilianza kidogo kidogo, nilianza kukopa kidogo, nikimaliza naongeza. Kwa hiyo biashara ikawa kubwa.
Le projet d'alimentation de la ville de Zagora, d'Agdez et de toutes les communes avoisinantes à partir du barrage d'Agdez a été parmi les grands projets structurants. Donc nous sommes fiers de sa réalisation. Il va permettre de sécuriser l'approvisionnement pour une population de 300 000 habitants.
These first 60 years of successful, transformative and impactful investments by the African Development Bank are only a beginning. Now is the time to leverage the successes and lessons of the past. Now is the time to our vision. And now is the time for even greater ambition to bring about the transformative change Africa needs. Together, we can make it happen. So, welcome to the 2024 African Development Bank Group's annual meetings as we celebrate 60 years of collective, transformative and visionary development leadership and transformative solutions as we lock hands together to create a better future for all Africans.
Avec votre soutien, le groupe de la Banque africaine de développement continuera à susciter l'espoir, à innover, à diriger et à utiliser sa position de première institution financière d'Afrique pour accélérer le développement de l'Afrique.
Isn't that wonderful? May I welcome His Excellency President Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda, who has just arrived. Welcome, Excellency. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming. They have given him so many names. Some call him the evangelist in chief, and others call him the optimist in chief. The president of the African Development Bank, Dr. Akinwumi A. Adesina, who apparently is the AAA president of a AAA bank. Welcome, Mr. President.
Thank you, Secretary General. Your Excellency, Dr. William Samuel Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, and our host. And I was thinking about how to really get your title right this morning. Congratulations on your trip to the United States, which was a wonderful state visit you had, but you came back with a new title. And it was called by President Biden, the major non-NATO ally. So you're going to start putting that behind your name, Mr. President. Thank you for welcoming us to Kenya. Your Excellency, Denis Sassou Nguesso, President of the Republic of Congo. Your Excellency, Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda. Your Excellency, Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa, President of the Republic of Zimbabwe. Your Excellency Mohamed Yunus Al-Menfi, President of the Presidency Council of the Government of the National Unity of the State of Libya. Your Excellency Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, President of the Federal Republic of Somalia. Your Excellency Musa Faki, my dear brother, Chairperson of the African Union Commission. Your Excellency Prosper Bozum Mbaza, Vice President of the Republic of Burundi, representing His Excellency President Evariste Ndayishimiye. Your Excellency Sarah Kungogelwa Amandila, Prime Minister of the Republic of Namibia, representing His Excellency President Nangolo Umumba. Your Excellency Ali Lamine Zain, Prime Minister of the Republic of Niger and a former staff of the African Development Bank. Your Excellency Alexandre Baro-Chambrier, Vice Prime Minister of the Republic of Gabon. Your Excellencies representing heads of state and government. Your Excellency Joachim Chissano, former President of the Republic of Mozambique. Professor Njuguna Ndungu, Cabinet Secretary of the Treasury of Kenya and Chairman of the Board of Governors of the African Development Bank Group. Your Excellency, I have two friends here because you asked us to work together globally. I'm delighted to be joined here by two of my colleagues that are presidents of multilateral development banks. Your Excellency, Dr. Mohammed Sulaiman Al-Jasser, President and Chairman of the Islamic Development Bank Group, and His Excellency Jean Lukun, President of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Banks. I'm joined by all my colleagues from African financial institutions and our partners, honorable heads of national institutions of the Republic of Kenya, my dear honorable governors of the African Development Bank Group, cabinet secretaries, excellencies, heads of diplomatic missions, my executive directors, my senior management and staff, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and of course, my beautiful darling wife, Grace, my number one supporter, counselor, and friend. Thank you. Good morning. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the 2024 annual meetings of the African Development Bank Group. These annual meetings take on a special nature this year because it marks the 60th anniversary of the establishment of the African Development Bank Group. We are delighted that you all are able to join us on this auspicious occasion. I wish to thank His Excellency President William Ruto for accepting to host these annual meetings in this beautiful country of Kenya and the Sunshine City of Nairobi. I wish to thank you all our heads of state and government for making time to join us for this special occasion. We are truly delighted that all our shareholders are here, represented by our dear governors from all of our shareholder countries. Your collective support, advocacy, and financial commitments to the African Development Bank Group make us who we are and afford us the opportunity to serve as Africa's premier financial institution. We are inspired by the vision of our founding fathers and mindful of our position and the role within the global financial architecture, as well as the responsibility placed on us by the African Union to mobilize financing for Africa's development. We carry the hopes and the aspirations of Africa in our institutional genes and in our corporate soul. As we gather today, we do so against the backdrop of major global challenges, including heightened geopolitical tensions, the disruption of global value chains, rising food and energy prices, increasing debt service payments, and, of course, climate change. The devastating effects of climate change are everywhere, from droughts to floods, from cyclones to unpredictable weather patterns, the loss of lives and property, and enormous fiscal costs to countries. May I please kindly request that we all stand to observe a moment of silence in honor of those who lost their lives during the recent floods in Kenya and all other countries who have been devastated by the effects of the climate change they did not cause or even know about. Your Excellencies, please. Thank you very much. May their souls rest in peace. Even as we remember them, we must be resolute about taking decisive action to build more climate-resilient economies. And that's why I applaud President Ruto for hosting the landmark Africa Climate Summit right here in Kenya, where we collectively agreed to put Africa at the heart of global climate change efforts, especially climate adaptation. Your Excellencies, African economies are showing great resilience despite the challenges posed by climate change, geopolitical tensions, global inflation, and rising debt, among others. The African Development Bank projects that Africa's real GDP growth will rise from 3.1% in 2023 to 3.7% in 2024 and 4.3% in 2025. Importantly, despite these headwinds, more than half, and that is 31 countries, achieved higher real GDP growth rates in 2023 than in 2022. And most importantly, 10 African countries are among the 20 fastest growing economies in the world. I think we've done well against the headwinds. I think we deserve a clap for Africa. The African Development Bank Group strongly supports African economies. In 2023, our financing totaled $10 billion across all of our high five priorities to light up and power Africa, to feed Africa, to industrialize Africa, to integrate Africa, and to improve the quality of life of the people of Africa. These high fives, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, are the accelerators of Africa's development. The bottom line is that the African Development Bank delivers. Since we launched these high fives in 2016, our financing has impacted the lives of over 400 million people. Last year, our work has significant impact across the continent, with 11 million farmers provided with access to improved agricultural technologies. 8 million people provided with access to new sanitation services. 3.5 million people with access to improved transport. 2.8 million people provided with better health services. 1 million people provided with access to clean water, and over 443,000 enterprises provided with access to finance. The African Development Bank is highly responsive. When the Russian war in Ukraine erupted, it posed tremendous food security risks to Africa. To forestall a crisis, the bank launched a $1.5 billion emergency food production facility to rapidly support African countries in their ambition to reduce food dependency over a 2-year period. As of April 2024, we have approved loans and grants of $1.496, to be precise, billion for this emergency food production in 35 countries. We also got help and support from our shareholders. $323 million of additional support from the government of Japan, the government of the United States, Norway, Germany, and the Netherlands. We have therefore fully committed $1.8 billion to 35 countries. I am pleased to report, Your Excellencies, dear governors, that we have reached 10.5 million farmers and supported the production of 26 million metric tons of food, valued at $10.79 billion, or 90% of our target market value, and we still have about 2 seasons to go. Your Excellencies, dear governors, the African Development Bank is a strategic partner of choice, trusted by countries. Right here in Kenya, when I came to see His Excellency President Ruto, he talked about our support making a huge difference at the State House. As he mentioned to me, President Ruto mentioned to me that when I visited, he says, thanks to the African Development Bank, we increased the number of households in Kenya that have access to connectivity to electricity from 2.5 million to 10 million by 2023. Thank you for that testimony, Your Excellency, Mr. President. On one of my trips to a village where the bank supported last mile connectivity for low-income households, a lady whose name was Grace, and that's not Grace, my wife, because she's also Grace, told us about the impact of our work. When asked if she knows Dr. Adesina as I was walking in front of her, she said no. When asked if she was aware that the African Development Bank, as President Ruto was saying, finance the project. She said, no, all I know is we once were in darkness, now we have light. Our impact is felt where it matters most, in the lives of the people we serve day and night. The African Development Bank has consistently invested in infrastructure. In the past 9 years, we have invested over $50 billion in infrastructure projects on the continent. By far the largest investment of any multilateral development bank or institution. And the impacts are visible. We are raising $3.2 billion for the East Africa Standard Gauge Railway connecting Tanzania, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Burundi. We are providing $500 million towards the development of the Lobito Corridor to link Zambia, Angola, and the DRC. We are mobilizing $375 million for financing the railway linking Nigeria to Niger Republic. We are mobilizing $3.5 billion to $5 billion towards the development of the Liberty Corridor that will link Liberia and Guinea. We have worked with our partners under the Africa Investment Forum to mobilize $15.6 billion of investment commitment towards the development of the Lagos-Abidjan corridor. Together with Africa 50, whose board I share, and it's a great institution, we are mobilizing $630 million for the construction of the road and rail to link the Republic of Congo and the Democratic Republic of Congo. We are financing the Guassib-Nado Highway in Morocco and the 1,000-kilometer highway linking Addis Ababa to Nairobi and Mombasa, which has expanded trade flows between Ethiopia and Kenya by 400%. That's who we are, a solutions and impact-driven bank. The African Development Bank, your bank, is in very strong financial shape. We have maintained our AAA rating, the only AAA-rated financial institution in Africa, by all global credit rating agencies. The bank posted strong financial records for the year 2023. First, income from loans and treasury investments increased from $775 million in 2022 to $1.73 billion in 2023, an increase of 123%. Second, the net income before distributions at $545 million is the largest ever in the history of the African Development Bank. Third, the amount that we allocate to reserve to build our liquidity buffers, $335 million, is also the highest ever in the history of the bank. I wish to thank the executive directors of the bank and their advisors, as well as my senior management and staff at the bank for their hard work and efforts, and please join me in thanking them. Yet, as we make these efforts, we recognize that a lot more financing is needed to accelerate Africa's growth and development. The calls for reforms of the global financial architecture is necessary to mobilize even more financial resources to achieve Africa's sustainable development goals. The G20 Capital Adequacy Framework called for multilateral development banks to optimize their balance sheets, to raise more financing to support countries. The African Development Bank, Your Excellencies, our dear governors, ladies and gentlemen, heeded that call. We have been at the forefront of several financial innovations to achieve this. Last month, the African Development Bank issued a hybrid capital on the global capital market, the first ever by a multilateral development bank, creating a new global asset class for investors. These $750 million hybrid capital will be leveraged 3 to 4 times to expand the bank's lending capacity. I am delighted that 2 weeks ago, the Executive Board of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, approved the use of the special drawing rights, SDRs, as hybrid capital, which is based on the proposal developed by the African Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank. If the approved limit of $20 billion of the SDRs is channeled to multilateral development banks like us, we can leverage these to deliver at least $80 billion of new financial support. I would like to use this time to thank you, our heads of states and government, for the advocacy that you have maintained on this particular issue at every single step, and also for the chairman of the African Union Commission, my dear brother Musa Faki, for all of the advocacy that you have also maintained, and for all of our governors for supporting us in this particular area. We are very grateful. Thank you very, very much. Now, I wish to ask for the support of all of our shareholders to make this a reality. Your Excellencies, dear governors, ladies and gentlemen, to tackle climate change, the African Development Bank is well on its way to reaching our goal of mobilizing $25 billion in climate finance. Last year, we devoted 45% of our total lending to climate finance. Our climate action window, under 16th replenishment of the African Development Fund, with support from the governments of the United Kingdom, Netherlands, Germany, and Switzerland, opened its first call for proposals. The response was amazing. It received over 2,000 proposals, and the 359 shortlisted application requests were close to $4 billion. The bank, your bank, is building strong and effective global partnerships to deliver more for Africa. Through the support of the G7, we are accelerating women's access to finance through what we call the Affirmative Finance Action for Women in Africa, or AFAWA, in partnership with the Africa Guarantee Fund, which is now working with 169 financial institutions in 43 countries. And I would like to say that Africa will go faster when we make sure that it flies with two wings. No bird flies with one wing. When we support our women, they actually run most of our economies. I think Africa will go faster, more inclusively. AFAWA, Your Excellencies, their governance is the first ever gender-focused collateralized significant risk transfer with counter guarantees provided by the government of Netherlands and France in support of scaling up finance for women. So far, AFAWA has approved $1.7 billion and financed over 18,300 women-owned businesses. And by the end of this year, AFAWA will have reached $2 billion in support of 30,000 women-owned small and medium-sized enterprises. Your Excellencies, their governors, to support youth entrepreneurship in Africa and to create youth-based wealth, the bank has established youth entrepreneurship investment banks. In partnership with the French development agency, Agence Française de Développement, and other partners, with support from the bank's multi-donor Youth Entrepreneurship Trust Fund. Ever since our board approved the first two Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Banks in Liberia with $16 million of funding, and Ethiopia recently with $12 million of funding, several countries, including Nigeria, Rwanda, Cote d'Ivoire, Tunisia, Togo, Zambia, Botswana, DRC, are working on submissions of their request. Your Excellencies, the bank is working with several partners to ramp up support for digital and creative sectors to create more jobs. Together with Islamic Development Bank, and my brother Al-Jasser is here, and the Agence Française de Développement, we financed $618 million IDICE program called Initiative for the Development of Digital and Creative Enterprises in Nigeria that will create 6 million jobs and add $6.4 billion to the economy. The African Development Bank, Africa 50, and the African Union established what's called the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa, or AGIA, which will mobilize $10 billion for green infrastructure in Africa and speed up Africa's green transitions. I am delighted that at the G7 Ministerial Conference in Italy just a few days ago, they gave global endorsement for AGIA. Together with the Islamic Development Bank, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, the OPEC Fund, the Arab Bank for Economic Development in Africa, the Africa Export and Import Bank, and the West African Development Bank, we are establishing what's called special agro-industrial processing zones in 11 African countries, including a $3 billion facility by the African Development Bank, Afri-Exim Bank, and the Arise platform. Your Excellencies, they ask us to work together as multilateral development banks, and we are doing that. At the spring meetings of the World Bank Group, President Ajay Banga and I launched a joint bold effort to connect 300 million people in Africa to electricity by 2030. We will host this year, together with Your Excellencies, an Africa Energy Summit later this year. I must say, this marks the first time for our institution. So not only are we reforming, but we are also changing how we work together as a system to deliver greater impacts at scale. That's because together we can and we will achieve more. Your Excellencies, for generations, women in Africa have borne the brunt of risks and hardships associated with cooking. Nothing could be more important than ensuring 1.2 billion people, majority of whom are women across Africa, have access to clean cooking solutions. I didn't start using glasses because I went to university and got smart. I started using glasses because as a kid, I was blowing charcoal into the cooking stoves of my mother. And when she bought a cooker for which we can turn on the gas, it was blue, I had to invite my friends to come and see it. In fact, I was turning it on because of the smell, because it was so different from the kind of smell that I used to have. So when we are talking about energy transitions, that is the kind of transition some of us have gone through. And therefore, I believe no woman and no child should ever have to die from the risk associated with smoke inhalation and other hazards, because today we lose 300,000 women for trying to cook a decent meal. Another 300,000 of their kids dying for trying to cook a decent meal. Enough is enough. It's not just about lighting a stove, it's about life itself. It is about dignity for women, and it's about protecting the environment from massive deforestation and a reliance on biofuel, biomass, firewood, and charcoal. And that's why I was honored and privileged to co-chair the Clean Cooking in Africa Summit with Our Excellency Samia Suluhu Hassan, the President of the Republic of Tanzania, who did a marvelous job, His Excellency Jonas Thor, the Prime Minister of Norway, and Dr. Birol, the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency. The African Development Bank led the way by committing to provide $2 billion towards clean cooking solutions for women over the next 10 years. I am delighted that the summit in Paris raised an additional $2.1 billion in commitments, bringing the total commitments to clean cooking to $4.1 billion, a historic achievement and a testament to the power of partnerships. Thank you very much. I thank you, all our shareholders across all 81 member countries, for providing us the support and the resources we need to serve Africa better. With your continued support, we will drive a bolder, bigger, and better agenda for Africa. I thank you, our partners, for joining your hands with ours as we deliver more together for Africa, and as we have done for the last 60 years. I thank you, our dear heads of states, your excellencies, heads of state and government, as you lead and as you show passion and commitment to the African Development Bank Group, to our continent, and for your generosity towards our efforts with you in your countries. I thank you, our boards of directors, for always mobilizing support for us in your countries and for relentless efforts you make to back our innovations and initiatives. I thank you, our boards of directors, for your strong oversight and support. And I thank you, my staff and colleagues, for being the best staff one could ever hope for. When I was recently interviewed, I was asked, what will I miss the most at the end of my 10-year term next year? I didn't have to think far. I said, my staff. So I'd like my staff to please stand. All my staff to stand. Guys, you're the best. Thank you for all that you do every single day. Please sit down. Together, let's all drive Africa's development forward, relentlessly, innovatively, and in more impactful ways. I remember when you elected me in 2015, I said at the time that this is not a job. This is a mission. After all, nothing could be more important than somebody being given the responsibility and the resources to go and change the place of our birth. So let's continue to make a difference, and let's continue to make Africa proud. Thank you all. God bless you all. Asante sana.
Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands once more together for the President of the African Development Bank. I'm sure by now you will agree with me with how I started by saying an evangelist. Now I can add the passionate evangelist for Africa's development. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to call upon His Excellency, Mr. Musa Faki Mahamat, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, to deliver his statement.
Your Excellency, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, Your Excellencies, Head of State, Government and Delegations, Excellencies, former Head of State, Honorable Ministers, Dr. Hakim Adesina, President of the African Development Bank Group, distinguished representatives of African multilateral financial institutions, distinguished representatives of the diplomatic corps and development partners, ladies and gentlemen. It is with real pleasure that I address this august assembly gathered here for the annual meetings of the African Development Bank. I would like to take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to President William Ruto, the government and the people of Kenya for the brotherly and warm welcome accorded to me in this beautiful and the large city of Nairobi, which has warmly accustomed me to it every time I return. Indeed, Nairobi has forged a formidable reputation as a premier hosting place for conferences at which key issues concerning the future of our continent are discussed. The African Union is grateful to you. I also wish to express my thanks to the President of the African Development Bank, my brother and friend, Dr. Adesina, whose passionate commitment to Africa's development, present and the future, has never wavered. Mr. President, thank you for your invitation to the African Union to this important meeting. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, cette rencontre se tient dans un contexte marqué par un enchevêtrement de crises géopolitiques et économiques, aggravé par ailleurs par les effets de la pandémie de la COVID-19, dont la rémanence est loin d'avoir encouragé la stabilité sociale et politique de nos États membres, en dépit d'une résilience africaine à la catastrophe mondiale. Pour y faire face, tous nos États membres ont été pris dans l'engrenage d'un endettement toujours pernicieux qui les maintient sous le joug des créanciers aux exigences étouffantes malgré les nombreuses promesses d'allègement de ce fardeau. Ces recours, parfois excessifs à l'endettement, bien qu'ils puissent être expliqués par un ensemble de facteurs endogènes, est également imputable à un modèle de financement extérieur combinant l'aide au développement, l'allègement du fardeau de la dette, les promesses du financement vert et l'attractivité des États africains pour les IDE. Ce modèle, explicité dans la déclaration d'Addis Ababa sur le financement du développement de 2015, a été par la suite relayé par des rencontres similaires à l'instar de celle de Paris de 2021. Les limites de ce modèle ont été établies sur la base de données objectives. J'aurais pu les ressasser, surtout devant les professionnels que vous êtes. Je me limiterai à une ou deux brèves remarques qui me paraissent dignes d'être mentionnées. En effet, les apports de financements extérieurs dans la gestion du développement de l'Afrique ont été très loin des attentes, traduisant ainsi une injustice, encore une autre, à l'égard de l'Afrique. Cette injustice cumule plusieurs visages. Bien qu'elle ne soit pas responsable du réchauffement climatique, l'Afrique en subit des conséquences sans bénéficier de la solidarité financière consacrée dans les déclarations successives des différentes conférences des parties. La gestion du système financier international, en échappant totalement au contrôle de l'Afrique, lui impose des coûts de financement élevés, en même temps que l'impact négatif des crises financières. Des disparités dans la réponse au choc de la COVID-19 ont clairement indiqué que l'augmentation de la liquidité par la création des droits de tirage spéciaux n'a pas profité de façon significative à l'Afrique, qui n'en a reçu que la portion congrue de 5,1% pour 1,4 milliard d'habitants. Alors que la recherche des moyens pour combler les déficits financiers de l'Afrique s'est toujours opérée dans le cadre de cette architecture financière internationale dont les limites font aujourd'hui consensus au sein de la communauté des experts africains, voire au-delà. Le temps est venu de s'interroger concrètement sur l'identification non complaisante des différents ressorts qui handicapent la mobilisation d'un développement de l'Afrique. C'est donc à point nommé que se tiennent ces assises, dont la tonalité innovatrice du thème réformer l'architecture financière mondiale afin de libérer des financements pour l'Afrique, annonce une large réflexion, embrassant dans la profondeur de son mouvement les principaux enjeux liés au financement du développement du continent. Dans cette mouvance, la centralité du rôle du groupe de la Banque africaine de développement n'échappe à personne. C'est donc une belle occasion pour le groupe de faire le point de ses réalisations au cours des dernières années afin de tracer une trajectoire viable pour le financement durable de nos économies confrontées à des goulots et contraintes multiformes. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, il m'apparaît plus qu'urgent de travailler à une réforme profonde de la gouvernance internationale afin de proposer et d'adopter des solutions pertinentes pour les pays confrontés aux problèmes de notation souveraine, de l'endettement excessif, des effets des changements climatiques, de l'évasion fiscale et des flux illicites, du renforcement des banques multilatérales, et j'en passe. Pour défendre l'intérêt de l'Afrique dans ces domaines, il me paraît logique d'inviter toutes les institutions financières africaines, ici présentes et même celles qui sont absentes, à accompagner l'Union africaine dans ses mouvements de basculement des équilibres économiques et financiers mondiaux. Aussi voudrais-je me réjouir de la récente adhésion de l'Union africaine comme membre permanent du G20. Cette adhésion marque un tournant décisif et porte un nouvel espoir pour l'Afrique, celui de s'impliquer dans la dynamique du processus de la réforme de la gouvernance économique et financière mondiale. Le G20 est un forum approprié pour nos institutions et nos pays pour initier efficacement, ensemble, les processus de formulation des positions africaines communes sur les questions stratégiques au cœur de la réforme du système financier mondial. Je pense notamment à l'épineuse question de la réforme des institutions de Bretton Woods, la réforme des mécanismes de gestion de la dette, du financement du changement climatique et du système fiscal international, notamment au regard des développements en cours en vue de l'adoption d'une convention cadre des Nations Unies sur la coopération fiscale internationale. Pour nous préparer à une éventuelle reconfiguration de l'architecture financière internationale, il nous revient d'accomplir, sans retard, nos propres réformes monétaires et financières. La mise en œuvre des institutions financières de l'Union africaine, créée depuis longtemps, plus de 20 ans, a trop souffert de son report. La Banque centrale africaine, la Banque africaine d'investissement, les fonds monétaires africains ainsi que la Bourse panafricaine des valeurs mobilières, c'est maintenant qu'il faut en adopter le plan concret des mises sur les rails. Aussi, j'en appelle à une reconstitution ambitieuse des ressources du Fonds africain de développement. C'est un instrument offrant des financements concessionnels indispensables pour le financement de nos économies. Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, au cours des dernières années, le bilan de la Banque africaine de développement a attesté de sa ferme volonté d'accompagner l'Afrique dans la recherche des réponses à ces problèmes. À ce titre, à travers ces 5 priorités stratégiques, elle a placé sur les rails la transformation structurelle des économies, posant les jalons de l'industrialisation et améliorant l'accès à l'électricité, à l'alimentation et aux infrastructures socio-économiques essentielles, autant de facteurs de consolidation de la productivité. En améliorant les conditions favorables à l'innovation et à la recherche dans les domaines clés de l'agriculture, de l'industrie et des services, en vue de faciliter l'accès des économies nationales aux chaînes de valeur régionales et mondiales, la BAD a joué et continue de jouer un rôle majeur dans la facilitation du commerce et dans l'intégration intrarégionale et mondiale de telles économies. Dans ces sillages, j'encourage vivement la Banque à intensifier son soutien à la zone de libre-échange continentale, à l'industrialisation de l'Afrique afin de réduire sa vulnérabilité aux chocs exogènes, à poursuivre ses investissements dans les secteurs clés de la santé, de l'éducation, de l'innovation, de l'énergie, de l'agriculture, de la sécurité alimentaire et des infrastructures durables, gage d'une transformation socio-économique certaine. Pour sa part, la Commission de l'Union africaine s'est résolument inscrite dans un esprit de positive collaboration avec la BAD. Dans cette collaboration va se matérialiser, entre autres, par l'élaboration d'un cadre stratégique continental conçu aux fins d'accompagner les États membres dans la mise en œuvre d'actions concrètes orientées vers une nette amélioration de la croissance dans les années à venir. La Commission a également apporté son plein soutien à l'initiative conjointe de la Banque africaine de développement et de la Banque interaméricaine de développement, visant l'accès aux capitaux hybrides déployés à partir de la mobilisation des DTS. Une telle mobilisation, équivalente à une source de financement complémentaire, réduira la dépendance aux emprunts traditionnels et potentiellement les coûts de financement.
Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank, that is to have a hybrid capital with the mobilization of the SDRs. This mobilization, which is equivalent to a complementary financing source, will ensure the independence for the financing. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in the light of such a record, which is anchored in a prospective vision, it cannot be remiss on me on behalf of the African Union and my own behalf to congratulate deservedly to my brother, Dr. Adesina. Maybe he can even do better. I have the conviction that the bank afterwards and later on the archives will speak of his actions and activities and achievements. So with this thought for the future generations, I wish you full and fruitful deliberations and success in your meeting, and I thank you for your kind attention.
Please join me in thanking the Chairperson of the African Union Commission for his address. We are very close to the moment where we will hear from the chief host of the annual meetings. But before then, may we please play the video from the host country.
Welcome to Kenya, the great home of many firsts in the world. Sitting comfortably in a small corner of the eastern side of the African continent, Kenya is the economic powerhouse and the hub of East and Central Africa, and steadily realizing its full potential as a global player on the world stage. With a growing and youthful, creative and innovative population of about 54 million people, Kenya is the fourth largest economy in the sub-Saharan Africa, strategically located as a gateway to Africa, with strong growth prospects supported by an emerging urban middle class and an increasing appetite for high-level goods and services. Kenya is ranked 56th out of 190 economies in the Ease of Doing Business Index and boasts of a large pool of young, talented, highly educated, skilled and sought-after workforce in Africa. As an influential member of various trade blocs including East African Community EAC, COMESA and Africa Continental Free Trade Area, Kenya as a channel in providing seamless access to almost 560 million people across the region and potentially millions more through further integration into bigger economic communities across the continent and the world. It is the region's logistical hub, playing a big role as a transshipment hub for goods moving to landlocked countries in East and Central Africa through the expanded Mombasa and Lamu port. Kenya is also renowned for its coffee, flowers, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and many more quality products, and continue to leave millions of international consumers in awe of the treasures of her fertile soil. Within Kenya's highly diversified economy lies countless opportunities for locals and international investment. There are brand new construction projects popping up all over the country, including city highways like Nairobi Expressway, expansion of the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, and the Standard Gauge Railway, among others. This exponential infrastructure development, coupled with political and economic stability locally and regionally, highlight enormous growth potential for several sectors including mining, agriculture, manufacturing, energy, and the blue economy. Kenya has come a long way in its journey to become Africa's Silicon Savannah, from being just another outpost for multiple multinational companies to spawning revolutionary apps, softwares, and digital innovations that are the envy of even the most advanced economies in the world. And when the local and foreigners are not busy bolstering Kenya's economy, they're enjoying her bountiful natural beauty and vibrant city life. World-famous sites and attractions are dotted all over the country, on pristine beaches, wild plains, beautiful lakes, and towering mountain peaks. Not only is Kenya the home of some of the world's most beautiful sites and wildlife, it has also given rise to a number of prominent global figures who have shot to global stardom in international football, athletics, entertainment, and even world politics. So, as Africa and the world head into an uncertain yet promising future, Kenya continues to rise and sets the pace as a pioneer across the board with big, bold, and brave steps. This is Kenya. For more information, visit www.makeitkenya.go.ke.
I'm sure that you will agree with me there's the need for one more applause for Kenya. Who knew many, many years ago when Senior Obama was going to the United States that there will be a Barack Hussein Obama emanating from Kenya but produced in the United States to be the President of the United States. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, may you please rise as we welcome His Excellency, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, to deliver his opening address.
Thank you very much. Please take your seats. Your Excellency, Denis Sassou Nguesso, President of the Republic of Congo. Your Excellency, Emmerson Mnangagwa, President of the Republic of Zimbabwe. Your Excellency, Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda. Your Excellency, Hassan Sheikh Mohammed, President of the Republic of Somalia. Your Excellency, Mohammed Yunus Memfi, President of the Presidential Council of Libya. Your Excellency, Mohammed Musa Faki Mahamat, Chair of the Africa Union Commission. Your Excellency, Evangelist Akiwumi Adesina, President of the Africa Development Bank, Your Excellency, former President Joaquim Chissano of Mozambique, Your Excellencies, Vice Presidents, Prime Ministers, representatives of heads of state, Your Excellency, Governor of Nairobi, Johnson Sakaja, Madam Martha Koome, Chief Justice and President of the Supreme Court of the Republic of Kenya, Excellencies, Ministers, Honorable Governors, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted and privileged to preside over the opening session of the 59th Annual Summit of the Africa Development Bank Group. On behalf of the people and government of Kenya, I extend a very warm welcome to each of you and invite you to feel at home in this land of many delights. It is a great honor for Kenya to host the 59th meeting of the Africa Group, especially as the group celebrates its 60th anniversary. Let me put this in context. We had also the privilege to host the 30th anniversary of the Africa Development Group in 1994. We are privileged to host the 60th. And I have requested the Africa Development Bank Group to offer Kenya the 90th anniversary in 2054. And I promise that even if I would be walking with a walking stick, I will attend. This milestone should frame our deliberations and engagements during these meetings. We are gathered here to reflect on the progress of our continent that has made in realizing the founding vision of this institution, the Africa Development Bank. Formed in the first decade following the independence of most African countries, the Africa Development Bank embodies the Pan-African ideology of sovereignty, prosperity, and unity. As a matter of fact, one of the founding communiques of this institution clearly declares the determination of African nations to use all our resources to lead all African countries to independence and achieve the development and prosperity of the continent in unity. That was done 60 years ago. And over 6 decades, the group, like the continent, has not only survived many crises and challenges, but has also grown stronger and achieved much in supporting economic growth and stability in our continent. It has become Africa's premier development financing institution. To date, it has financed 5,432 projects across our land, 4,036 of them which have been completed, provided a mechanism to coordinate the fight against poverty, improve the standards of African financial institutions and other institutions, and contributed significantly to conflict prevention and resolution. You agree with me, ladies and gentlemen, that Africa Development's performance has been nothing short of sterling. I think they deserve a better round of applause. Nevertheless, the pace of African economic growth and development has not kept pace with the rest of the world. More concerning is that the pace of African development remains far behind its undeniable potential. Intra-African trade remains low, with its share of global GDP less than 3%. Africa's share of global trade is also low, at just about 2%, and our exports are primarily unprocessed produce and raw materials. Not surprisingly, the rates of poverty and unemployment are still high on our continent. The vulnerabilities arising from this situation undoubtedly contribute significantly to conflict, economic refugees, and in this age of frequent extreme climate shocks, climate refugees. There is tremendous urgency in developing and implementing transformative interventions to turn things around for our continent, our countries, and our people. I am confident that this sense of urgency resonates very strongly amongst African leaders, and I am encouraged that we are not just doing something about it. We are actually making very good progress. Our continent is growing at the world's fastest rate, exceeding the global average of 3%, and 11 of the world's fastest growing economies in 2023 were African countries. We were told that by Adesina. Between 2000 and 2002, Africa's real GDP increased at an annual rate of 4.3%, well above the global average of 2.9%. 7 of the 10 world's fastest growing economies were in this continent of Africa. The Pan-African Economic Integration agenda has finally taken off. Our regional economic blocs are vibrant and effective, while the African Continental Free Trade Area has come into effect and already made a huge impact. Although much remains to be accomplished before intra-Africa trade is smooth across borders, the data indicates strong positive movement following the launch of the Guided Trading Initiative. As we look into the future, with this optimism, we are also cognizant of the immediate challenges we must confront and overcome. Africa faces multiple serious challenges, including geopolitical risks, the broader effects of armed conflict, the COVID-19 pandemic and its effect, disruptions in the global supply chains, and persistent extreme weather due to climate change and macroeconomic instability. To compound this crisis, the economies of the continent continue to bear the burden of rising costs of servicing huge national debts, caused in part by high global interest rates and, of course, external shocks. I am, however, confident that the strong positive response by African leaders and nations to the Africa Union Agenda 2063 signals our collective intent to undertake radical transformation of African economies, achieve sustainable development goals, and unite our people in prosperity. We have what it takes to succeed, and current activities show movement in an encouraging direction. To achieve this transformation, a consistent commitment of substantial resources is required to invest in infrastructure, industrial capacity to deliver rapid growth. However, we face the rigid barrier of global financial architecture that is fundamentally misaligned with our aspirations. We routinely borrow from international markets at rates far above those paid by the rest of the world, often up to 8 or 10 times more. These rates are said to factor in something arbitrary called risk profile that is notably not applied when considering mineral extraction, even in areas of active conflict. It is safe, we are told, to mine in spaces where there is conflict, but it is risky to lend to African economies. What a contradiction. The debt problem faced by many countries, which consume the largest share of national resources and starve development agenda, we are a direct result of this unjust financial architecture. This situation not only makes debt unsustainable, but also undermines growth, prevents countries from investing, and denies millions of people, especially young men and women, their fair shot at life's opportunities. Africa remains most vulnerable to the effects of climate change, as evidenced by recent devastating floods, for example, in Kenya, and drought in Southern Africa, from which we are still working to recover, as well as other climate-related disasters across the continent. The adverse impact of climate change or the fiscal sustainability of many economies, especially in developing countries in Africa, deserves our serious attention. Despite contributing only 4% of global carbon emissions, we bear the brunt of climate change effects. Climate change is a threat multiplier. Its direct impact and related responses negatively affect our fiscal position through reduced revenues and increased public spending. The frequency of extreme weather events continuously diminish the resources available for public investment and provision of critical public goods such as health, education, and other social services. In particular, climate change has often resulted in substantial reallocation of resources towards mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. This is why Africa advocates for a financial architecture that integrates the issues on climate change and public finance at the center. I am proud of African heads of state who have not hesitated to make their voices heard in various fora, including through the Africa Leaders Nairobi Declaration on Climate Change and Call to Action that we held here in Nairobi. Climate change and sovereign debt are now firmly integrated, trapping governments in a vicious cycle where increasing losses and damage from climate impacts leads to rising costs of mobilizing resources for public investment. With such high financing costs and constrained government budgets, developing countries continue to struggle investing in low carbon and climate resilient development. At risk, therefore, are both climate action and our sustainable development goals. A better, more responsive, and fairer international financial architecture is urgently needed, and time here is of the essence. The financial architecture we advocate for as Africa today should integrate the continent's most challenging development issues of debt sustainability and climate vulnerability to enable development goals, SDGs, and Agenda 2063 commitments to be achieved. I am encouraged by Africa Development Bank's vision for the continent, underpinned by the high fives strategies and the objectives of the newly adopted 2024-2033 10-year strategy, which provide important foundations for these critical continental objectives. Let me agree with my brother, President Adesina, on the array of investments that he has spoken to this morning. Kenya is among the beneficiaries in a very big way of Africa Development Bank's financial might and their innovative financing of projects. Let me give you just 3 examples. Africa Development Bank became the first institution for us to build the first superhighway from Nairobi through Thika, and today they are dueling the same road all the way to Maroa, about 150 kilometers. Africa Development Bank worked with us to provide water and sanitation in 28 towns and cities in Kenya that today all of them are complete. And Africa Development Bank is building with us the largest water dam in Kenya in a place called Thwake. And of course, Africa Development Bank did what Adesina said. Last 10 years, working with Africa Development Bank, other multilateral banks, and friends, they have enabled Kenya to increase electricity connectivity from 27% in the last 10 years to 76% today. We have been clear and consistent in our advocacy. Africa is neither seeking handouts nor asking for charity. We are a continent of sovereign people who aspire to grow in a just multilateral system and access development financing on fair terms. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not too much to ask. We were clear at the Africa Climate Summit last year when we called for reforms of the international financial institutions and a range of new global taxes to fund climate action. We were clear at COP28 in Dubai last December when we once again emphasized the urgent need to mobilize investment for climate transition in developing countries from public and private sources globally. We also agreed to support the creation of markets that can mobilize resources at scale and called for the reform of the international financial architecture. Today, we assert that transforming the international financial architecture is an imperative that will give Africa a fair chance to turn its immense potential into opportunities to overcome multiple challenges and develop inclusively and sustainably. I take this opportunity to reiterate my call at the recent concluded IDA 21 summit here in Nairobi, that we appeal for a substantial 17th replenishment of the Africa Development Fund by at least US $25 billion to increase its capacity to continue providing concessional financing to the least developed African countries. We therefore call on our donors and development partners to scale up their investment in our continent's premier development financial institution, the Africa Development Bank. To further strengthen the capacity of our multilateral development institutions, we strongly support the proposal to rechannel special drawing rights through the Africa Development Bank as endorsed by the Africa Union's Assembly of Heads of State and Government. And because we must believe in ourselves for others to believe in us, and we must invest in these institutions for others to invest in them, Kenya has made the decision that over the next 3 years, we are going to invest $100 million in enhancing our shareholding in Africa Development Bank, Afri-Exim Bank, and Trade Development Bank. We have already made the investment in Africa Exim Bank. I will be discussing with my brother Adesina on our investment in Africa Development Bank, because as nations in this continent, we must begin to understand that if others had to believe in our institutions, we must believe in them first as the owners. The multiplier effect of the rechanneled SDRs will significantly increase the lending capacity of the Africa Development Bank. This initiative has the potential to unlock additional financing for high priority and transformational development projects, which are currently constrained by available resources. Kenya pledges to continue championing SDR rechanneling through the African Development Bank. And Mr. President, as a demonstration of Kenya's confidence in the Africa Development Fund, the concessional window, we are making a commitment of $20 million as Kenya into that kit. It is Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. It is a demonstration that for us to raise $25 billion, we need to demonstrate our commitment and believe in the investments we are making in this institution. Nobody doubts that investing our resources in Africa Development Bank is a logical, it is a profitable investment. I have since had I was motivated by the profits I saw and the dividends that will be paid. And I think it's a very worthwhile investment. I want to encourage public and private entities to equally invest. I promise you it is a worthwhile investment. Given the glaring shortcomings of the current climate financing ecosystem, we need to fundamentally reconfigure prevailing financing patterns and adopt more innovative financing structures that eliminate access barriers. I commend the Africa Development Bank Group for developing innovative financial instruments tailored to our continent's unique needs. These instruments are more ambitious in financing and are our significant development projects, including heavy investments in smart agriculture and clean energy generation. However, more financial resources need to be channeled towards climate adaptation in Africa. At my last meeting with President Adesina, we were discussing them extending our water program, which we started with the Africa Development Bank, to phase 3, where we are discussing now a $400 million facility with the African Development Bank for water harvesting, water storage, and irrigation that will support Kenya's food security, especially in the context of the effects of climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, at this juncture, I wish to underscore the critical role of the Africa Development Group's annual meetings in advancing progressive discourse, structured dialogue, and knowledge events. These engagements provide an opportunity for collective deliberation and facilitate the dissemination of relevant knowledge among high-level decision makers in Africa from different sectors, including government leaders, academics, and the private sector, among other key players. The 59th annual meeting takes place at an important juncture in our continent's developmental history. I am confident that all of us gathered here are able, willing, and ready to apply ourselves accordingly and do justice to our common agenda of taking Africa to the next phase of transformation through constructive deliberations. Let me say this finally. My colleagues, the heads of state and government in Africa, asked me to take over the baton from my senior, President Paul Kagame, on reform of institutions of the African Union. It is an assignment I intend to work on with the support of my colleagues, to align it with aspirations of today, and so that we can support more financial institutions like the Africa Development Bank and all the other continental institutions to support Africa's development and progress. As I take over the assignment from President Kagame, let me make 4 points on that reform. Number one, we will be proposing that the Africa Union Commission, the executive, be given sufficient power to be able to prosecute Africa's economic diplomacy so that we can unlock the potential of our continent, so that we can showcase the assets that we have, our mineral assets, our agricultural development assets, our human capital assets, our natural resources assets, and use them to create investment opportunities so that we turn our potential into opportunity and opportunity into investment and create a better Africa for all of us. Number two, to make Africa Union a fit-for-purpose organization to take charge of the consolidation of the African market through the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Today, in Africa, intra-Africa trade is only 15%. Intra-Asian trade is 60%. Intra-European trade is 70%. Intra-Africa trade is 15%. We are struggling looking for markets everywhere except in our continent. We must believe in ourselves. We must first sell to the market that we have in our continent. It is the silver bullet. And it is what is going to increase the contribution of trade from Africa from 2% to the next level. Number three, we must make Africa Union fit for purpose to secure this continent. The Africa Union must take charge of our peace, security, and stability. The Africa Union must make us solve the problems of conflict and war in our continent. We cannot progress as a continent if there is war in Sudan, there is trouble in Somalia, there is problems in DRC, there is problems in the Sahel. We must take charge of our security. We must take charge of our stability, and Africa Union must step forward to be counted to provide that cover. And finally, the Africa Union must work with us to close the infrastructure gap. We will be proposing 4 assignments. The Africa Union was initially a liberation movement. We must repurpose it. We must re-engineer it so that it addresses the challenges of the moment. We will also be making a proposal to have a much more accountable Africa Union. Today, the Pan-African Parliament has no connection to the Africa Union executive. We are proposing that we are going to reduce the size of the Pan-African Parliament to make it much more cost-effective from 275 members to 100 members. One woman, one man from every country. And make it a full-time organization. Let it approve the budget of the Africa Union. Today, the budget of the Africa Union is approved by people who are not people's representatives. We want the people of Africa to take charge of this continent. And finally, we must bring about the Africa Court of Justice so that we can sort out our issues. We don't want any African to be dragged to courts elsewhere to sort out our issues. We need something short of a revolution to have a good organization for ourselves. I look forward, ladies and gentlemen, to the output of these meetings, and I am optimistic that your recommendations for reforming the architecture of the global financial institutions will be as radical and as ambitious as the AU's Agenda 2063. Your participation here promises viable solutions to enable our countries mobilize sufficient resources to close Africa's development financing gap and accelerate our structural transformation across the continent. Ladies and gentlemen, the 59th annual meeting of the Africa Development Bank Group is now officially opened. I thank you.
If you don't mind, please keep standing, and let's give one more big round of applause to the President. You may be seated. Now there's a challenge between President Ruto and President Adesina as to who is more passionate evangelist. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, with that strong and inspiring address, we have come to the end of the opening ceremony, and we will now transition to the presidential dialogue, Africa's transformation, the African Development Bank Group, and the reform of the global financial architecture, which will then be followed thereafter by the commemoration, a short commemoration ceremony of the 60th anniversary of the African Development Bank. Thank you so much for being with us at this opening. The meeting continues, and I hand over to the team responsible for the dialogue. Thank you for having me.
Your Excellency Dr. William Samoei Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, Excellencies, heads of state, representatives of heads of state, governors of the bank, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, kindly permit me to stand on already established protocols. Once again, Karibu. Wow. That's the first time Karibu has been met with silence, so I'm going to say that once again. Karibu. Now that's a little bit more enthusiastic. I think we're getting into it. Thank you very much, President Ruto, for those really, truly inspiring and passionate words. Very, very heartfelt. Thank you very much. Welcome to this presidential dialogue on Africa's transformation, the African Development Bank Group, and the reform of the global financial architecture here at the annual meetings of the Board of Governors of the African Development Bank, holding at the KICC, Kenyatta International Conference Center, in the beautiful, and I must say green, capital city of Nairobi. My name is Victor Oladokun. Yes, you can clap for Nairobi and certainly for Kenya. Kenya is green and has had a long history of being so. My name is Victor Oladokun, and it really is an honor to moderate the two presidential dialogues that are ahead of us this morning. Our conversations will revolve around what must be done in a fast-changing, dynamic global environment to kickstart and transform Africa's economies, as well as ensuring that they do remain sustainable. But first, permit me to invite to the podium a global leader who has a reputation, actually two reputations. One for not believing in the word impossible, and two, for being dubbed Africa's optimist-in-chief, a very well-deserved tag. Not because he is unaware of the continent's many challenges, but because he strongly believes that under any circumstances, change is possible. Please join me in welcoming to the podium once again the President of the African Development Bank Group, Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, as he comes forward to provide opening remarks.
Your Excellencies, heads of state and government, their governors, I wish to thank you immensely for attending these 2024 annual meetings, and in particular for being here for this particular session, which is a debate or conversation with you heads of state and government about the issues of the transformation or the reforms of the global financial architecture, the African Development Bank, and of course, Africa's transformation. This is one topic that I know is close to your heart, as you all have been advocating for the reform of global financial architecture, the reforms of the United Nations, including the United Nations Security Council, and we just heard from His Excellency President Ruto all about that. And why is that being done, or why is that necessary? That's to ensure that Africa's voice is heard, that Africa's priorities are in fact prioritized, that Africa's financial needs are appropriately considered, that there is equity, fairness, and justice in dealing with the most pressing challenge of our time, climate change. Clearly, the global financial architecture has a great role to play in mobilizing resources for development. Yet, it is not delivering enough for Africa in 5 ways. First, it is under-delivering on climate finance for Africa. Today, while Africa's climate finance needs are in the order of $277 billion annually, the global financial architecture delivers only $30 billion for Africa, a continent that contributes the least to climate change and which suffers disproportionately from its negative effects, as we have seen in several countries. Second, the global financial system is not delivering financing at scale needed for accelerated development to meet the SDGs. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has noted that the financing need now has moved from $2.5 trillion to $4 trillion annually. Africa alone will need $1.3 trillion. With SDGs, of course, due to lack of adequate financing, Africa will not be able to meet SDGs by 2030 under the current trajectory. Third, the COVID-19 pandemic showed the huge divergences in financing capacities to deal with global pandemics and its effects between developed countries and developing countries. While developed countries provided over $19 trillion to support their economies, during this crisis, pandemic, equivalent to roughly 18% of the global GDP. African countries provided only $83 billion, or 3% of their GDP. No wonder there is economic divergences between Africa and developed countries and even emerging market economies, because we hear something about COVID, that people have long COVID. But now also in terms of fiscal space for African countries, it's a long COVID in terms of fiscal space because it takes a long time to be able to recover from such pandemics like that. Fourth, the global contingent financing facilities have not been fair and equitable. Take the case of the special drawing rights, as President Ruto has mentioned. Out of the $650 billion of Asia allocation, Africa got $33 billion, which is roughly 4.5%. In other words, those that needed it the most got the least. However, I want to really thank the IMF. I want to thank my sister, Kristalina Georgieva, and all our team at IMF, and of course the IMF board, for recently approving the use of SDRs as hybrid capital, which of course multilateral development banks like us can leverage 3 to 4 times and deliver greater impact based on the model that the African Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank have developed. We're very grateful for that support. I also like to commend the IMF for providing a third seat for Africa at the board of IMF, as the chairperson of the African Union Commission mentioned the importance of having more space around the table for Africa, and we're grateful for that as well. The admission of African Union to G20 is also a commendable development, long overdue. Fifth, the global financial architecture is failing in dealing with the high rising debt burdens of African countries. While the G20 Common Framework is working to address these challenges, and we support it, to achieve equal and comparative treatment between official creditors, private creditors, and commercial lenders, the process, however, is taking way too long. Unfortunately, we shouldn't forget that Africa went through things like that in the 90s. The Multilateral Debt Relief Initiative, also the Highly Indebted Poor Country Initiative, that just dragged on, and unfortunately we had a lost decade because of that. There's therefore a need for speedier, comprehensive resolution of debt burdens of countries. It's hard to run up a hill with a backpack of sand behind one's back. So while globally the Debt Service Suspension Initiative helped to defer due debt service payments, it only postponed it. It did not solve the problem. There is need for more timely, comprehensive debt treatment, debt restructuring, and debt resolution for African countries. And finally, Your Excellencies, the rules of global taxation, as President Ruto rightly mentioned, need to be modified to ensure that they are serving developing countries. Cooperation across jurisdictional tax rules is needed to avoid Africa losing taxes to multinational corporations that do illicit capital flows. And sometimes I hear a lot about illicit capital flows. It's not just African countries. In fact, quite a lot of multinational corporations have more lawyers, they have more accountants, they have more people than the whole country has. And therefore, we have to make sure that the whole issue of profits, tax avoidance, and profit-based shifting is addressed. In my view, if you do business in Africa, you should pay taxes in Africa. Your Excellencies, we look forward to hearing your views and perspectives, especially what the African Development Bank and all of us can do in the reforms of the global financial architecture. I'm particularly delighted that my dear brother and friend and colleague, His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Al-Jasser, President and Chairman of the Islamic Development Bank Group, is here with us today at our annual meetings, and he will also be sharing with you some thoughts ahead of your conversation. Once again, thank you, Your Excellencies, for your participation. It's a great honor for us to have you. Thank you very much.
Just as Dr. Adesina mentioned a few moments ago, we'd like to use this opportunity to welcome to the podium a friend of Africa and a friend of the African Development Bank, His Excellency Dr. Mohammed Al-Jasser, President of the Islamic Development Bank, to give his keynote address.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Your Excellency, President William Ruto, the President of the Republic of Kenya. Your Excellencies, Heads of State, Your Excellency, my dear brother and friend, Dr. Adesina, President of the African Development Bank Group, the honorable heads of international and regional institutions, honorable ministers, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed an honor to be part of this special gathering to celebrate the African Development Bank Group's 60 years of remarkable contributions to Africa's development journey. I am delighted to address such a distinguished audience today to share my thoughts on Africa's transformation, the African Development Bank Group, and the reform of the global financial architecture. Let me also take this opportunity to highlight the exceptional value we at the Islamic Development Bank place on our strategic partnership with the African Development Bank Group. It is a commitment to a shared dream of transforming the African continent and helping it deliver on its hopes and aspirations. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Africa, a continent full of promise and endowed with abundant resources. Africa, a continent that holds the dreams and aspirations of hundreds of millions of its people. Africa, a continent full of potential, yet grappling with critical challenges on its road to structural transformation. Since the turn of the century, many African countries have exhibited strong economic growth. A significant portion of this growth is the result of better macroeconomic management, higher investment and trade, larger regional markets, and to a lesser extent, some degree of structural transformation. Despite this progress, the core components of human development, including income levels and formal employment, remain low and vulnerable to shocks. This leads me to the key question that the region and its governments need to tackle in the coming years. What will it take to ensure that this higher growth is sustainable and inclusive? To foster and sustain development gains, economic growth alone is insufficient. African countries need to deepen their structural transformation to ensure a prosperous and secure future for all Africans. The priority will be on transforming natural resource-driven economies into knowledge-driven ones, while taking advantage of the region's demographic dividend. Reforms ought to focus on fostering a more conducive business environment to enhance competitiveness and encourage initiatives that take advantage of regional growth opportunities. In this regard, the African Continental Free Trade Area offers a huge potential for building regional supply chains, developing intra-African production networks in manufactured goods, and enhancing competitiveness. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Africa is on the ascent. and I am optimistic about its development prospects. However, recent estimates suggest that Africa will require an additional $200 billion annually to achieve the SDGs by 2030. Moreover, it is becoming increasingly evident that the current global financial system will not be able to provide the necessary support to achieve the ambitious transformative agenda of Africa. It is thus not surprising that there are calls for a rethink of this framework to make it more efficient and just, giving a greater voice to the global South. Additionally, significant resources are being diverted to debt servicing at the expense of critical investments in health and education. This situation clearly demands urgent reform. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, over the past 5 decades, the Islamic Development Bank Group has remained steadfast in its commitment to Africa's socio-economic development. By the end of 2023, our financing to Africa totaled approximately $74 billion, including $45 billion specifically dedicated to enhancing trade. Our efforts have been significantly strengthened through long-standing cooperation with development partners, including the African Development Bank. Between 2017 and 2023, we achieved the record co-financing volume of $2.9 billion with the African Development Bank, enabling us to co-finance 22 operations across diverse sectors, and some of them have been mentioned by my brother, Mr. Adesina. I am pleased to announce that during the Islamic Development Bank's Golden Jubilee celebrations in Riyadh last month, we further enhanced our partnership with the African Development Bank by expanding its scope and setting a higher co-financing target over the next 5 years. In this quest, where collaboration is paramount for success, the role of the Arab Coordination Group, or the ACG, in fostering development and progress across the African continent cannot be underestimated. To this end, the ACG has been a long-standing supporter of African countries and has cumulatively invested over $220 billion in the region to date. Bolstering its support for African partner countries, in November 2023, the ACG pledged a $50 billion financing envelope over the next 7 years to help build resilient infrastructure and inclusive societies in the African continent. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we share common dreams for Africa, a continent free of poverty where no one is left behind, a continent of hope and prosperity driven by innovation and entrepreneurship, a continent providing meaningful employment opportunities for its youth. We remain steadfast in our commitment to work with our development partners to rekindle hope, to realize Africa's dreams of transformation, especially when we recall the wise words of our host, His Excellency President Ruto, and I hope he doesn't mind me quoting him, who said recently, only very recently, that Africa is neither facing east or west, but is facing forward. I wish you all successful deliberations throughout the remainder of this dialogue. I look forward to the positive impact these discussions will have on shaping our strategies and actions to mobilize affordable financing for Africa's inclusive growth and structural transformation. Thank you very much. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Many thanks, Dr. Al-Jasser, for your keynote address and for framing many of the issues which will surround much of the presidential dialogues that have been convened this afternoon, or this morning and afternoon. At this point, I would like to invite members of the first presidential dialogue panel to take their seats on the platform. So, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, please welcome His Excellency Mr. Musa Faki Mahamat, Chairperson of the African Union Commission. Her Excellency Mrs. Sarah Kugon Gelwa Amadila, Prime Minister of the Republic of Namibia, representing His Excellency Mr. Nangolo Mbumba, President of the Republic of Namibia. His Excellency Mr. Mohamed Yunus El Menfi, President.
Welcome back. You have been watching the 2024 African Development Bank Group annual meetings holding in Kenyatta International Conference Center in Nairobi, Kenya. Up to about 3,000 delegates, including African heads of state, ministers, central bank governors, members of the development community, the private sector, and other stakeholders are attending the event. This year's theme is Africa's Transformation, the African Development Bank Group, and the reform of the global financial architecture. Well, these annual meetings are held, but this year, again, the emphasis is on the key themes, what President Akinwumi Adesina calls the I-5, giving Africa a voice in the global space and using the African Development Bank to promote the development process, promote inclusion, promote economic growth, provide opportunities, and the emphasis has been on Africa's place in the global financial architecture and other issues such as climate action, and then leadership, governance, infrastructure, and how Africa can have greater interaction. And I think under President Adesina's leadership, so much progress has been made. There's been so much dynamism, and many would conclude now that he deservedly, has earned that second term in office. Controversial at a point, but he has moved beyond his sterling performance in the first term in office to also continue to excel in his second term in office. The first Nigerian to get to that position, the first Nigerian to get a second term, but more importantly, his vision is African, and he has been successful in that regard. As His Excellency Mahamat, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Chad, former Prime Minister of Chad, and now Chair of the African Union, pointed out in his contribution, and as also President the President of Kenya, acknowledged, President Ruto, William Ruto, just back from the United States, state visit to the United States, the first African president to be so invited in 16 years, acknowledged that President Akinwumi Adesina of the Afdb has been doing well with high-five strategies. We pulled out of the session at a point when the presidential dialogue was going to start. We just listened to the president of the Islamic Development Bank. It will have been interesting to get more perspectives from the presidents of the African countries to find out. But the bigger issue, of course, will be the outcome of the deliberations at this annual meeting of the African Development Bank. About 150 journalists on the ground there, and Arise News is ably represented there by General Bosin Omofaye. I call him General in the media, that is. And so you could expect that Arise News will continue to bring reports, footages, and a more robust, more elaborate, comprehensive analysis of the outcomes in due course.
Absolutely. If you listen to the opening remarks of the president of the African Development Bank, Nigeria's Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, he took time out to detail some of the achievements of his administration thus far as we look at the ceremony for the African Development Bank's annual meetings being held in Kenya. I think chief of what he said was the investment, some key investments made to support infrastructural development and development across the African continent. One of the things he had said was the contributions of an investment of $1.5 billion to cushion the effect of the Russian-Ukraine war on food security across the African continent. He also spoke about his passion and drive to ensuring gender inclusivity across the African continent and talked about investment through the AFARA program, which we have talked about here on the show, and how that has supported women across Africa, highlighting the point that we're able to develop faster as a continent if we pursue and promote gender inclusion. Then he spoke about Youth Entrepreneurship Development Fund and the contributions and investments in young people and the youth across the African continent. And so it was excellent to see him just speak about and the passion. And I think Dr. Victor Oladokun there spoke about how passionate he is about development and the work that he does on the African continent. And then good to see the host president, Dr. William Ruto, the president of Kenya, also speak about their partnership with the African Development Bank and also talk about the investments. $20 million Kenya is committing to the African Development Concessionary Fund, concessional window, and also the fact that we must continue to work together and Africa must own its story and lead when it comes to development. Great there to also see partnerships that have developed or that the President Akinwumi Adesina has been able to promote with the European Development Bank, with the Islamic Development Bank, as we saw the President speaking as well, across different continents, and just to see him strengthen those partnerships and work towards the development of Africa. So really great conversations there. Like you said, Dr. Bati, it would have been really great to see the presidential dialogue, but I'm sure we'll bring you details from that. Mr. Boston of Omofaya on ground to bring us key details from what's going on ground in Kenya.
I mean, very apt conversations that are needed for the African continent as we speak, because it's been a mixed bag. So much potential, but so much poverty. And African Development Bank, since it was set up, is constantly in the vanguard of trying to get people out of this poverty, bring about development, bring about youth infrastructure, agriculture, and the likes of the African continent. But it's been difficult because when you look at the statistics, funds is a very big problem on the African continent. For a population that is about 1.3 billion, the GDP can be compared to that of blue chip companies abroad. And that's the irony. You know, when you look at Apple's revenue, for instance, or Apple's valuation, it tops the GDP of most of these African countries put together and the entire population. So it's a population that has a lot of potential, but very little growth. The African Development Bank, yes, has done a lot as regards bridging the gap, but it cannot do so much until we have, one, the cooperation of nation states, and two, the direct move of capital to be able to reshape the African destiny. The missing link has been that capital edge. And that's why when you see, even in the advancement we talk about in tech, in fintech and all of that, most of that capital still comes from the West. When will Africa be able to generate its own inbuilt capital to be able to rejig things? I think that's a big problem. I mean, and this was a continent that used to be very rich. I mean, we remember the case of Mansa Musa while he was going on his pilgrimage. How he gave so much gold ounces out to people and the price of gold fell. But we don't have that Africa any longer. So in the relief fund for the Russo-Ukrainian war of 1.5 billion post-COVID and all of that they've put forward, all of those monies still a drop in the ocean. And that's why you see that Dr. Bati was talking about the politicking that went on, as regards additional coming back. You see that could only go on because the likes of the Americans were big donors in here. The Saudis too were big donors. The Islamic banks too were big donors because we need that ascendancy of capital, which they bring challenge. And that's why Ruto just came back from America. What did he go to do? Pretty much went to look for capital. But what they give Ruto to was not free, because Ruto will be putting his citizens on the lines in Haiti to be able to bring about peace. So that's the quid pro quo that is happening. The millions of shillings, the Coca-Cola investment and other things announced is because Ruto is ready to step in where America feels they don't want to go into Haiti now. So Africa must be able to develop its own capital without constantly going to beg the West or having quid pro quo deals. And that's what it needs to look at. Ruto also talks about the justice system in Africa, that we should have our own independent courts to be able to, bring perpetrators of various heinous crimes to book. But Ruto too should also answer the question of what did he do in the Rift Valley during the elections of the former years when he and Kenyatta were together. Because except our political participants understand that Africa cannot grow without fairness, peace, justice, and equality, then nothing will happen. It's not about seat-tightism and trying as much as possible to grab power every time, or pitting people across ethnic tribal groups, across the slums of Kibera, putting all sorts of, strife between the Loas and the Kikuyus and all of that, which Ruto was found wanting in that regard, although he was also cleared by the top ICC court. So these are the things we should also look at. And also, development cannot come to Africa if Africans don't believe in the prospect of development. What the African Development Bank is doing is trying to jumpstart that development for getting Africans to believe. But do the young people actually believe that prosperity lies on the African continent, or except when they go to the West? And that's why we are seeing all of this mass migration happening and not seeing this growth internally. Also, this development cannot come if we don't have connectivity across the African continent. Inter-African trade is very low because one of the factors, I think Dangote talked about this recently, how you need to get about 15 passports there about to move around. One of the factors that make it is also the factor of connectivity. Try to search on your phone. You want to go to Abidjan, you want to take a flight. It will set you back over $1 million. A 2-hour journey just here is almost as expensive as going to the UK, which is 6 hours away. So if you don't have that inter-African connectivity, it's always problematic. Going to Senegal, you have to have a whole day layoff, or sometimes you have to have more layoffs. So these are also the things we need to be able to do, to be able to make routes efficient across the African continent. So all of these things put together, I'm sure most of these factors are going to be discussed again, when we have the presidential dialogue and the talk and all that, which is already on the way. I'll give you more briefings as regards that. I yield the floor.